Now let's take our first subject of the day. The June 12, 1993 presidential election to date is regarded as Nigeria's freest and fairest. Though it was annulled midway by the military government of General Ibrahim Babangida, the candidate of the Social Democratic Party, billionaire businessman, sports philanthropist Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, was leading and was indeed declared winner years later by the chairman of the Electoral Commission, Professor Humphrey Onwosu. The impasse that followed and the struggle to recover the mandate took along with it many lives, including that of the winner of the election and his wife, Kudirat Abiola. Nigeria emerged out of it with a return to civilian rule in 1999. But years later, after that watershed election, there are those who believe that the significance of the June 12 election has been lost on the nation. Tokunbo Oyetunji, Arise news correspondent, has the details.
Long gone, but remains unforgettable. June 12, 1993, the day that many believe Nigerians decided to express their democratic freedom by making a choice devoid of primordial sentiments. Two political parties and their candidates were in contention for the highest office in the land. But the message of hope, the campaign mantra of billionaire businessman Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, flying the flag of the Social Democratic Party and his old warhorse running mates, Babagana Kingibe, resonated across the land even to the ancient city of Kano, where their opponent of the National Republican Convention hailed from. Banishing poverty from Nigeria was a major campaign point for the SDP team, but perhaps more significant for the generality of the voters was the prospect of having a government popularly elected by them 10 years after the last of such exercise following the collapse of the Second Republic in 1993 after a military coup.
In 5 years' time, no Nigerian child will go to bed hungry by the grace of God.
Abiola, a Muslim, had a running mate, another Muslim, and it never mattered to the voters. They were only bothered about competencies and not how the candidates prayed. The excitement spread and expectation was high for most of the voters and the entire country, awaiting the results of the election, which started coming in almost immediately. The voters had spoken after all and were waiting a brighter Nigeria that could stand tall globally, having made such a huge democratic decision. But the military boys had their plans. The election was annulled.
It's true that the presidential election was generally seen to be free, fair, and peaceful. However, there was in fact a huge array of electoral malpractices virtually in all the states of the Federation before the actual voting began.
And the country boiled.
It will continue off and on until the military release the result of the June 12 election and put the democratically elected president, who is myself, in charge of affairs. I won't go to war. I won't encourage my supporters to go to war. I will fight for peace, and we will get peace.
But the military government was adamant. Abiola supporters were equally insistent on reversal of the annulment. The battle raged, with pressure from the international community mounting. The best the military did was for the leader, Ibrahim Babangida, to step aside and install a civilian interim leader who lasted 3 months in office before being forced out by an ambitious defense minister. It became clear that the military boys weren't ready to vacate the scene. Abiola and his backers made their move and declared the businessman Nigeria's president on June 24, a year after he was elected.
I'm being arrested. I'm just going out now with the police. Hello. There's a large crowd here, and I was being escorted out to detention by singing the national anthem.
Why are they arresting you?
They are arresting me on an allegation of felony, nameless treason or something like that. They're not doing anything, they're just taking me away. Please let me go. I'm delaying them.
The People's President was clamped into detention, many of his supporters and backers too. And impasse followed. Lives were lost. Abiola, his wife Kudirat, Pa Alfred Rwani and others. Attempts were also made on several others. But Nigeria survived with a return to democracy in 1999. It would take another 19 years for the sacrifice of the symbol of that election, MKO Abiola, his wife, and those of others who paid one price or the other to be properly recognized, and the day situated in its proper place in Nigeria's history. But beyond the honor and recognition of June 12 as Nigeria's Democracy Day, not a few Nigerians think the significance of the day has been completely lost on the nation. Poverty, which Abiola promised to send packing, is high in the country at the moment. Incessant killings and ethnic suspicion are rife. Separatist agitations are on the increase, and many, rather than celebrate on the day, are planning to hit the street in protest of many things going wrong for a nation that had high hopes on June 12, 1993. Tokumbo Oyetunji, Arise News, Lagos.
Now joining us to speak on this is Professor Bell Ihua, one of Nigeria's leading public opinion posters and social researchers. He's currently the executive director of the opinion research think tank known as African Policy Institute, API, and professor of practice in opinion research at Coal City University, ENUGU. Good to have you, Professor Bell Ihua. Thank you very much for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Yesterday was June 12th, a special date in Nigerian history, Democracy Day. Now, June 12, 1993, Basharu MKO Abiola was elected by the Nigerian people to become president. But June 23rd, that election was annulled. So much has happened in Nigeria since then. In 1999, there was a return to a democratic rule and the exit of the military from the Nigerian governance space. But 28 years later, 22 years later, will you say that that sense of unity that was demonstrated on June 12, 1993, when a Muslim ticket, was supported across the country, will you say that Nigeria is more divided today than it was united in 1993 around key issues? And if so, why?
Thank you very much for that question. First things first, let me start by saying Happy Democracy Day to Nigerians. But to respond to your question, we must realize that, well, some progress has been made. Where we used to be, no. Have we moved some notches forward? Yes. But are we where we ought to be? No. When you think of June 12th, you think of the struggle that led to the passing of the late MKO Abiola, his wife Kudirat. And when you think about other freedom fighters, others that led their, at the forefront of the struggle, the likes of Chief Gani Fawemi, the likes of the Caesarea of SRK, the late Bola Ige. You think of the likes of Dr. Olisa Bakoba and the others. And you remember that these are people who have fought, who have given their lives to this struggle for the emancipation of democracy and return of democracy. You see that the unity that Abiola stood for, the nationalism that Abiola stood for back then is not what we're experiencing today. We have data from our studies on national social cohesion to suggest that as of 2019, 45% of Nigerians say that they think the country is much more divided compared to how it was 4 years ago. And much recent data, the ones that we've just collected this year, 2021, on social cohesion tells us that 65% of Nigerians are saying the country is much more divided than it was 4 years ago. So we are seeing more or less a retrogression from the country being much more united to the country being divided. But that being said, there are opportunities for us to look into how we can unite the country. But it's important that as we talk about June 12th, we must remember that the main protagonist, Chief NK Abiola, was a nationalist. He was the one that was looking and speaking about every Nigerian. You heard in that clip where he mentioned that in 5 years, by the grace of God, no Nigerian child less than 5 years old will go home hungry. This was the kind of ideals and ideas that Chief MK Abiola stood for. He was a nationalist, he was not a separatist. And if there's anyone today that's talking about Abiola or reflecting on the ideals of Abiola, we should be reflecting on the ideals of nationalism, the ideals of togetherness, the ideals of oneness, the ideals of cohesion, and not of separatism. Thank you.
Well, Bashorun MK Abiola was a symbol of unity, as you yourself have explained. And he also talked about farewell to poverty. Today, 28 years later, Nigerians are talking about separatist tendencies. There are many groups in Nigeria who believe that it's better to secede and abandon Nigeria. And poverty, has become even more established in Nigeria, despite the fact that the current administration had promised that 100 million people will be lifted out of poverty. And in the last 2 years, President Buhari was just saying in his Democracy Day address that 10.5 million people have been lifted out of poverty. In your opinion, as a public opinion researcher and as a social scientist, what is it that we need to do that we are not doing?
Thank you very much. First of all, I need to point out that, even though the president said about 10.5 million people have been lifted out of poverty, the targets that they put on the table when this government was coming into power in 2015 was that in 10 years they will ensure that about 100 million people are lifted out of poverty. This is coming to the 6th year, thereabout, and we're still talking 10 million people. Clearly, there's a divide. Today, Nigeria has become the poverty capital of the world. We are having high rates of insecurity, and the president mentioned that in his speech, as well as in the interview he granted to Arise TV, that the twin drivers of insecurity in this country are unemployment and high levels of poverty. I go to the field. I've been opportune to be one of those that have walked across the length and breadth of this country. Between 2012 and 2016, we're conducting serious polls on the Niger Delta region for Stakeholders Democracy Network. Between 2013 and 2017, we're conducting surveys around northern Nigeria for DFID program known as Nigeria Stability Reconciliation Programs. So we've traveled around the country. Poverty is real. Poverty is rife. And this is part of what is driving this insecurity. But can we say that the inaction of the government, and in certain cases, the ill thought out actions of the government, is what have led to the rise of separatist tendencies? The likes of Sunday Igboho or the likes of Nnamdi Kanu, who come out to speak about separatism. We know from the polls that the average Nigerian is not interested in living this united Nigeria. The average Nigerian wants a fair, free, equitable, and just society. Nigerians feel that so far they have been excluded from the scheme of things, and they believe that if a lot more can be done to include them, to give them a sense of belonging, to give them a sense of reasoning, we need to forge a new national movement, national view for the country. When you look at the Americans, they talk about the American dream. We need to forge a new national movement that we can have, every Nigerian can come together united to say we should be responsible for making the country work instead of looking at anyone or looking at the government in spite of irrespective of religion, irrespective of ethnicity or tribe, we all have to look into working together, because until every Nigerian sees it as his or her responsibility to make Nigeria work, we cannot depend on only the government to make Nigeria work. All hands must be on deck. And the more we begin to organize, the more we begin to engage, the more we begin to have the critical mass of people in various sectors coming together to discuss issues that pertain to their community, that pertain to their state, that pertain to the nation, we begin to push back these separatist tendencies. The reason you hear on social media or all across that these separatist tendencies are rising is because we as citizens are not coming out to speak our mind. We know from the polls, for example, Afrobarometer poll has shown that at least 80% of Nigerians support democracy, but just that the style of democracy being practiced today is what the challenge is. So as long as we can introduce policies of inclusion, introduce policies that will take down marginalization, there are clamors across the country in various states, in some states, across certain age groups like the young people, complaining that the country as it operates today does not work in their interest, does not deliver services to the young people, does not provide an enabling environment for its people to thrive. Something has to be done to correct that imbalance.
Well, Professor Ihua, yesterday was Democracy Day, June 12th, but what we saw, particularly in the southern parts of the country, was that many angry young Nigerians took to the streets. For them, it was not a day of reflection. For them, June 12, 2021 was not a day of celebration. For them, it was a day of protest. And, you know, in many parts of the country, they were met with resistance, with repression by state authorities. Now, why do you think that there is this trust deficit between young Nigerians and government? And what can government do to build trust and win the confidence, particularly of young Nigerians who trooped out in October 2020, protesting against police brutality under the banner of #EndSARS, and who yesterday again, more in the southern part of the country and in the Federal Capital Territory, went about calling for revolution? And why do you think there's this division in terms of public opinion response to the government between the South and the North?
Thank you very much for that question. First and foremost, it's important to express that the polls have it, that when this president came into power in 2015, his approval rating, and that was an expectational approval rating, was about 85%. But as things moved on over the years, his most approval rating is hitting about 20, just slightly above 20%. So there's become a trust deficit in the system. Our polls also have shown that Nigerians' trust for President Buhari at the moment is about 33%. That has declined dramatically from over 80% when he came into power. So that tells you that a lot is happening. The reason we see a lot of people on the streets protesting, they are protesting against what they feel is happening to them. There's a huge perception of marginalization. There's a huge perception of exclusion. People feel excluded. People don't see themselves as being part of this country. People see themselves as being abandoned, especially the young people. When you look at what happened in October last year, the EndSARS protest, EndSARS was a metaphor. EndSARS represented young people coming out to say enough is enough to police brutality. Enough is enough where they cannot have access to opportunities. We conducted a study last year that was titled The Canada Rush, checking out the motivations for Nigerians emigrating to Canada. The reasons why they are emigrating is because they feel Nigeria is not giving them the opportunity to thrive. So there are young people who have energy, who are creative, but the country is not giving them enough opportunities. So they are coming to the streets to express their opinions, to express their anger. So that is why we are seeing that. But you asked also why are we seeing differences from the southern part of the country to the northern part of the country. Obviously, in our polls, we also see these differences. you tend to see the southern part of the country coming out to express these views, but the northern part of the country, obviously because there's some sentiment towards the president, he's our man and we do not want to be on the streets. But I can tell you that we have conducted polls across this country. Poverty has no tribe. Poverty does not understand Fufu Day, it does not understand Efik or Ibibio or Yoruba or Hausa. Poverty is poverty. Nigerians are poor from various parts of the country. We have been on the field, we have seen these people. And if the government is going to win the trust of the people back, we need to start looking at policies that promote inclusion, policies that promote unity, policies that bring the people together, policies that shows that every Nigerian can be given an opportunity to thrive and excel in spite of whatever part of the country that they come from. You know, I watched the Arise TV interview with Mr. President when he talked about, you know, the youth. He said, you remember those youths who were coming to Abuja to, you know, to upstage me. But you see, the president's interview, in my opinion, was a very interesting interview because it helps us to get into the mind of the president to understand how the president thinks about some of the issues facing the country. You know, you asked him questions about security. He talked about the fact that borders, you know, were shut between Benin and Nigeria, between Niger and Nigeria. He talked about the fact that the borders were closed so that we can grow our own food and all of that. But what the president failed or missed the opportunity to address was the fact that there are killings in Igongon, there are kidnappings in Kaduna, there are kidnappings in Kebbi and different parts of the country. Nigerians want to know what is going to happen to bring these killings to an end, to bring these kidnappings to an end, and what is going to happen to make the economy thrive and create jobs for the young people. Every year, millions of young people graduate from the tertiary institution looking for opportunities for work. As long as they don't get opportunities for work, they will be angry at the system and they will look for ways to get back.
Well, Professor Ihua, I see that you focused at great length on the president. And that's what usually happens in Nigeria. We tend to blame the president and the presidency for everything. But when you talk about trust deficit, how about other institutions of state beyond the presidency, the judiciary, the legislature, even the state governments? Do you think that the problem is just Buhari's problem, or we have the same challenge with regard to the states and the other institutions of government?
Thank you very much. We have the same challenge with different organs of government. So, for example, the legislature has three main mandates: representation, lawmaking, oversight. We've conducted polls in the past that have seen that Nigerians think that the legislature is not properly representing them. We saw the case of NSAS. Young people came out and clamored. And we ran a poll at the time about Nigerians and NSAS. And Nigerians expressed their disappointment at the legislature for failing to come out to speak for young people and sort of parleying with the executives to make sure that young people could not have the opportunity to express themselves. Same with the judiciary. There's been a lot that have happened in the system with the removal of Justice Onoge and the rest of that. The image of the judiciary has somewhat been also tainted. However, if you look at also the states, there are clamors at different states for different state governors who are not performing. If you look at the different states and the statistics across the states, we can also see that young people are also angry with their state governments. Not many states have put in policies that can create real jobs, tangible jobs, and give tangible opportunities, but it has been sort of politicking. What many Nigerians are seeing is politicking, favoring of party members, and not creating policies that can serve in everyone's opinion. However, I think we have a great opportunity here as citizens to begin to dialogue, to begin to discuss, to begin to come together to say, are there ways we can discuss and bring about the unity that we want to see? Are there ways we can discuss and begin to find solutions to the problem? They've been talking about restructuring, for example. It is thinking that while the leaders, so to speak, are talking and having a dialogue about restructuring, we also need to constitute groups of young people across the country to begin to build scenarios, scenario planning for the next 20 years, scenario planning for the next 30 years. What is 2050 going to be like? What is 2040 going to be like? We don't need those who are in their 60s or the 70s to come and plan 2050 for us. Can we bring those in the 20s, in their 18s, in their 30s to come together, sit on a table and discuss how that future will be? I think if you look at the state governments or you look at the local governments have been eroded by state governments. And young people are looking for an opportunity, any opportunity at all, to express their opinions that they want a better Nigeria.
Well, I'm not too sure that many people will agree with you that scenario planning for the future or the year 2050 should be done only by young people. Isn't the best way to go the wisdom of the village coming together? Now, but you talked about dialogue. What form should that dialogue take? At the moment, some people are saying, well, the National Assembly has organized public hearings and the National Assembly will come up with a new constitution that will solve all problems. But some people are saying that what we need is actually a conference of ethnic nationalities or a complete overhaul of the constitution, or in other words, a people's constitution as the basis for renegotiating the terms of the union. But you just talked about a dialogue. What form, in your opinion, should that dialogue take?
First of all, I think we must admit that the National Assembly cannot do this job alone. The National Assembly is a group, yes, that represents Nigerians, but so far, I believe citizens have seen that, there's a lot of politicking in the system. A lot of things that should be done, but because of political interests or political favors, there's a lot, and it's taking a long time to achieve. So the sort of dialogue that we need is a dialogue that brings together different groups of people, ethnic, social, cultural, religious, bring people together to discuss. But you see, the truth of the matter is, when we have leaders discussing, there is need for young people to also discuss. And, it comes back to the point I made earlier. I've conducted polls across the country, especially speaking to young people, and I see the anger and the sense of exclusion that they feel, that they're not including them in discussing the future of this country, the future of the country that they hope to be part of. We're talking 20 years, we're talking 50 years down the line. Of course, only God knows who will be around then. But chances are it's the young people that will be around. So I still insist that while we are having this dialogue, whether ethnic, religious, social, and professional, bring these groups together to have a large dialogue on the fault lines of the nation, restructuring the nation. It's also important to have young people discuss. These young people are creative, they are talented, they're energetic, they can talk AI, they can talk artificial intelligence, talk machine learning, talk robotics, and say where they want to see Nigeria go in the next 30 years. Clearly, when I reflect on the Arise TV interview with Mr. President, I can see that there is a clear gap. The president spoke for his generation. He spoke for an era. But you can see clearly that there's a gap between the president's understanding of the issues and the current understanding of the issues. You can see that what the young people are thinking, what the young people feel, it's not particularly. And you see, in all honesty, I don't blame the president for it, but I blame his aides. Research should be conducted. Polls and surveys should be conducted by the presidency and those in government. And they should help use that information to aid Mr. President and to give him a clearer picture of what is happening in the country at the moment.
Well, Professor Ihua, before I take you up on other issues, you keep talking about polls and surveys, and I know you've been in charge of NOI polls. You are now in charge of African Polling Institute. But there are many people who are very suspicious and uncomfortable about opinion polls. In 2015, for example, there were some pollsters who said President Goodluck Jonathan will win the election by a very wide margin, but that did not happen. In 2019, there were some pollsters who said, oh, the APC had exhausted its goodwill and overstayed its welcome. But the APC still won at the federal level and also at the state level. Now, I mean, how reliable are these polls? Is it a question of methodology, or that, this opinion research, which is an area of specialization, what should we watch out for? Are they just probabilities that we do not necessarily have to rely on?
Well, polls are what they are. They are indicative. So polls, survey, research, they are indicative. But what we see in a lot of governance is that governance have become conjecture. Governance have become intuitive. What polls, surveys, or research does is that it would help leaders to be able to take decisions based on evidence. So yes, we can say there are times polls do not get the right answer, but at least it gives you an idea of what's on the heart of the people. It gives you an idea of what's in the mind of citizens. For governance to be effective, it has to be participatory and inclusive. And polls and surveys provide that platform through which citizens can participate in governance, through which citizens who otherwise may never be heard can have an avenue to say, we think this is our pressing issue, we think this is the issue that the president should address, we think these are the areas, we don't agree with this policy, but we agree with this policy. So basically, polls are indicative to be able to help, policymakers make right decisions, make decisions based on evidence, as opposed to making decisions intuitively. But if you want to talk about what makes a poll a good poll, for example, it's that it's independent, it's scientific, it's devoid of any political inclination whatsoever. You also have to look at the methodology. How is the polls collected? Are the data collected randomly? Is it collected scientifically? If it is, then we can lay some credence to the response coming out of those polls. But if it's just sitting down and speaking to a few group of people, as we have it often done, you speak to a few people and you say you have the opinion of Nigerians. You can't call that scientific. For you to call it scientific, it has to be robust. You must be able to have an even slice of the country to be able to know that this is the opinion of Nigerians, this is the opinion of citizens, and you can use that to help drive policy.
Well, except that Nigerians change their opinions almost on a daily basis. But let me ask you, from your research, how strong are the following factors? Gender, religion, ethnicity, and then the role of institutions within the Nigerian system, as part of this attempt to ensure that Nigeria works and that democracy works for the people.
Thank you very much. Gender is becoming a very strong subject, not just in Nigeria, globally. As we have seen, there's been a lot of talk about gender inclusion in governance. In fact, recently I had a presentation for the Policy and Legislative Advocacy Center, PLAC, on gender inclusion in driving the information age. Gender is a big issue. Also, ethnicity and religion have become big issues. As you can see, recent elections in Nigeria have been tilted towards religion or towards ethnicity. In fact, we know that when our politicians want to play their politics, they begin to whip up sentiments around religion, begin to whip up sentiments around ethnicity, and because they know that this ethnicity card or religion card plays. But you compare that to 1993, where we had an election of a Muslim ticket, and that Muslim ticket was widely supported across the country, and no one bothered the religion of the candidates, the presidential candidate and his running mates. Everyone was rejoicing, looking at the situation, hoping that the country would be much better. And that tells you how the country has moved over time. From a time where religion was really not an issue to now a time where religion is an issue. So you see what has happened in a state like Kaduna, for example, and where in the last election they had a Muslim ticket, and there were cries and, there were people speaking out from the southern Kaduna region saying there should have been a Christian on that ticket, because when you look at the demography of the state, you have a significant population also of Christians. So that tells you that, ethnicity, religion, gender is beginning to play a huge role, in the country. But talking about the other question where you asked, I think we should move beyond ethnicity, move beyond religion. We've seen recently from our polls, when we asked the question of what kind of candidates, what kind of person are you looking forward to as the country moves on to the next level, that people said we do not care about religion, we do not care about ethnicity, we do not even care about gender, but we want a president that can deliver the goods of democracy, that can deliver the dividends such that every Nigerian, in spite of ethnicity and religion, will be able to have the opportunities, of good governance.
Well, you said earlier on that the approval rate of President Buhari in your latest research is 33%. I'm not too sure government spokespersons would agree with you, but in terms of the research that you have done, what are your major conclusions with regard to the journey towards 2023?
Well, thanks for that. We have a few conclusions. As I mentioned earlier, number one is that we need to forge a new national identity for Nigeria. A new national identity that everyone can be proud of, that everyone can key into, that every Nigerian can look up to and say, I'm a Nigerian. I can raise my international passport anywhere in the world, raise my shoulders high and say, I'm a Nigerian. And that needs to start from the top. Creating a new identity will require that those in government provide a climate of inclusion. And with all that is going on, these separatist tendencies going all around the country at the moment, we have a great chance now to be able to call these voices to the table, to sit down, let's discuss what are the issues, what should we do to unite this country. So at every point in time, I see these opportunities for us to jaw as opposed to war. And that's one major point. The next is that a lot needs to be done to address perceived issues of exclusion and marginalization. In different countries or different portions of this country, there are strong perceptions of exclusion and marginalization. The Southeast, for example, had the strong perceptions of exclusion. So a lot needs to be done at the center to make sure that we rally around and ensure that anyone feeling a sense of exclusion is brought in and given a sense of belonging, because that is what cohesion is about, that every citizen is given a sense of belonging, everyone is brought together. The other thing that we need to do is we need to start building a critical mass of people in various sectors, professional sectors, social gatherings. We need to start building a critical mass of people to start having little conversations across the country. These conversations are important for this country going forward because it's at the local levels, at community level, at the town levels, at the state level. Let these conversations happen for us to be able to chart a new course for Nigeria. Also, on the issue of poverty, a lot more needs to be done to widen the National Social Investment Program. The president talked about the National Social Investment Program. As it seems today, with all the amounts of money that have been spent, they all seem like a drop in the ocean. A lot more needs to be done to improve or to rejig the economic policies such that we can create more jobs for our teeming young people and reduce the level of poverty. I also think one more important thing to do is that we must support our gallant men and women of the military. These men and women are putting their lives at risk, even with sometimes very little, support, but they still go out there, they still do their best to protect this country, And not just the government needs to give them more support in terms of ammunition, in terms of resources, in terms of what they need to get intelligence gadgets. Even citizens need to see them, give them their support, appreciate them when you see them. Tell them that we appreciate you. We know you guys are doing a great job for this country. May God continue to bless you. I think when our military men see this sort of expression from citizens, it will build their morale and let them know that they're not alone in the struggle, that people are really rooting for them. And finally, these dialogues need to happen. A national dialogue that should look into bringing ethnic groups, social groups, religious groups, bring the country together, and let's discuss the way forward. The truth of the matter is that the current arrangement, the current way the country is going, is not sustainable. It is not sharing the benefits of democracy across board. We need to have this dialogue to perhaps renegotiate the fault lines and get Nigeria working for all Nigerians again.
Well, Professor Ihua, we have just 1 minute to go, and if you can respond very quickly to these two questions. Do you think that the Buhari government has done enough in terms of bringing a closure to the issue of June 12? And additionally, Igbo presidency. Are you saying, when you say Igbos should be given a sense of belonging, are you saying that Igbo presidency is the way to go in 2023? Very briefly.
Thank you very much. I'll take your last question first. On the issue of Igbo presidency, I have just, as part of my professorial work at Coal City University in Enugu, I just completed what we call the Southeast Barometer. And the Southeast Barometer data, we are still in the process of putting the report together. Igbos say they want an Igbo president. And that's what the data is showing. The reason we are seeing a lot of clamor there in that region, especially from the likes of IPOB, is that the Igbos are hoping that they'll be given a chance to at least take a shot at presidency. On the other question that you asked, I think, yes, that Nigerians are looking for an opportunity or a rallying point that will bring them together. The government, the administration may not have done enough, especially looking at the ideals that Chief M.K.O. Abiola stood for. If you look at those ideals of nationalism, the country is much more divided today than it was then. If you look at the ideals of eradicating poverty, we are today the poverty capital of the world. So a lot more needs to be done to build on the ideals of Chief M.K. Abiola to be able to then justify the essence of making June 12 our democracy.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bell Ihua, for joining us on this Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show. Thank you very much indeed.